Hello, this is Tim Brown, and I want to take a moment to thank you for listening to this sermon audio today. I hope that it's a valuable time and that it encourages you in your faith journey. Whether you're just beginning a search for God or you've known Him for years, I hope that it points you to Jesus as our hope and that it encourages you to dive deeper into God's Word to learn more about Him and what He says. Again, thank you for taking the time to listen, and may God bless you today. John chapter 8, that's where we're going to be hanging out this morning, and we're going to be launching a new series called I Am Jesus, and we're going to be in John chapter 8 today. A very familiar story. John records 8 explicit, provocative I am statements by Jesus, and these statements were obvious to the people of his day. Their meaning, sometimes they are very provocative for us in our day and time, and some people misunderstand his statements, but they're very powerful today. Some people wonder if Jesus should have heeded the advice of a novelist named Gwen Hayes, who said, "My best advice is to be yourself unless you're psychotic. Then you might want to try a different tactic." Some people think that Jesus was actually a psychotic egomaniac who was stuck on himself. He was an absurd, messed up, troubled man who thought that he was a great person, but really was just a man. And you may believe that. If you're here, some of you may believe that, and I'm not here to criticize that at all. You have a right to believe what you believe. We believe, as Christians, that Jesus was in fact the Son of God, and that He was who, and He is today, who He said He was, and who He says He is. That He sits at the right hand of the Father, and that He is all of these things. But when you think about public figures in our culture, in not too distant past, for some of you remember when a man by the name of Muhammad Ali came on the scene. Anybody remember Muhammad Ali? And we'll have a picture momentarily. We're having technical difficulties. I've had technical difficulties all morning. Seems like personally with my computer. But Muhammad Ali, he had a famous saying. He said, "I am the greatest," right? I am the greatest. And so, and for a very brief period of time, in a very limited context of professional boxing, he was the greatest, was he not? But his mouth was bigger, I think, sometimes than his boxing capabilities. But he could get people excited about that, and he was no doubt a great boxer. But he was delusional, thinking that he was the greatest. And some people think that Jesus was delusional. But in fact, in these 8 different conversations, 8 different I am statements, we see some very powerful things. That if Jesus really is who He says He was, He says, "I am Jesus, the Son of God," then there are these outrageous statements actually become powerful and real and impacting in our lives. If it's true, then those implications are tremendous, and they reach deep into our daily lives, and they actually change us. This changed life that we talk about in Jesus is real because of Jesus. Because if Jesus isn't who He says He was, then He's just like any other prophet that any other religion talks about. But we believe and we know, because He's changed our hearts, that He is who He says He was. In John 6, He says, "I am the bread of life." He sustains us. When we're hungry, He satisfies. In John 8, we're going to look at this today. "I am the light of the world." He gives us light in a dark, dark world. John 8:58 says, "Before Abraham was, I am." He is self-existent. He created Himself. He didn't create Himself. He's always been. He's created everything. And so we can always count on Him. John 10, "I am the door." He is accessible, and He gives us access to the very life and the very love of God through Him. John 10 says, "I am the good shepherd." I am the good shepherd. He guides us. We're going to talk about that next week. John 11 says, I am the resurrection and the life. I mean, there's power and hope through that. And over in John 14, he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. He is everything. He is access. John 15 says, I am the vine. If we remain in him, then he will give us everything we need. Just like a branch is grafted in. A branch is part of the vine. It has life. It has nutrients. It has everything to live. So, in the weeks leading up to Easter, we're going to be talking about the light of the world today. And then next week we'll talk about the Good Shepherd. And then on Easter, the resurrection and the life. And so I encourage you to invite people, but to be here. Because these statements, we can overlook them because they're so common, but they are so powerful. Jesus was He is our very essence. He is life. He is the way. He is the truth, the life. Jesus made a very bold statement in a very dark world. John 8:12, if you look there, we're going to start with the last verse and then we'll go back and recap. John 8:12 says this, Jesus spoke to the people once more and said, I am the light of the world. If you follow me, you won't have to walk in darkness because you will have the light that leads to life. How many of you were afraid of dark as a kid? Raise your hand. All right, okay. Now put your hands down. How many of you as adults are afraid of the dark? Raise your hand. It's okay. It's all right. It's totally okay. Don't lie. Don't lie. You know, the dark has a lot, there's just unknowns, right? We don't know what's going to be there, right? And so it just makes it scary. Well, it kind of reminds me of a little boy who was afraid of the dark. And one night his mom said, hey, would you go out to the back porch and get the broom for me? And so maybe their porch was like the house I grew up in. It was dark out there, right? I mean, it was just pitch black. There were woods out behind our house where I grew up in East Texas. And so the boy was scared, and he's like, Mom, I'm scared of the dark. I'm afraid. And she goes, no, it's okay. Jesus is with you, and he's going to be there to protect you. He's with you wherever you go, and he's there to help you in any way. And he's always there for you. He's always there for you. And the boy goes, Are you sure about that? She goes, yes, absolutely. Jesus is with you. So he goes to the back door and he opens it just a little bit and he peeks out and he says, hey, Jesus, if you're out there, can you hand me the broom? He's like, I'm going to check this out. But we can be afraid of the dark. Jesus said that he is the light of the world. Satan, on the other hand, is the prince of darkness. The prince of darkness. In Acts 26, it says this, and I will rescue you from both your own people and the Gentiles. Yes, I am sending you to the Gentiles to open their eyes so they may turn from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God. Then they will receive forgiveness for their sins and be given a place among God's people who are set apart by faith in me. You see, the apostles were sent with a message to the Gentiles to rescue them from darkness. Now, we don't see it as much today, but it is real. There are idols that are being worshipped all over the world. In America, in Texas, in Mesquite, in Garland, in Forney, wherever we live. But in that day, there were pagan idols. There were temples to the gods and goddesses, Aphrodite, and dark things went on. Sacrifices of human sacrifices. And although we don't see that, and sometimes we don't equate the darkness of our world today with back then, it's very, very real. We live in a dark world. Jesus said, I am the light of the world. Now, we're pretty familiar with this light of the world statement, but we may not be familiar with the context that it's in. John 8:12 comes after one of the most amazing grace stories in all of the Bible. Amazing stories. And we're going to look at this story and we're going to see what it says to us about three things: the law, the love, and the light. The story that we're going to unpack here is the story of the woman caught in adultery. And we're going to read through this passage and just kind of look at these three things: the law and the love and the light. So the first thing we're going to look at is the law. The law reveals our guilt. The law reveals our guilt. If you look in John 8:1, we're going to read, it says, Jesus returned to the Mount of Olives, but early the next morning he was back again at the temple. A crowd soon gathered, and he sat down and taught them. As he was speaking, the teachers of religious law and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in the act of adultery. They put her in front of the crowd. She had been caught red-handed. Why the man didn't get thrown in the middle, I don't know. They brought the woman, right? Keep in mind, in those days, women were not too highly regarded. Even in the Jewish culture, sometimes. It was sad. And by the way, Christianity has done more to elevate the place of women in our culture and our society than any other faith out there. We value women. Here at Calvary First, we have great leaders that are women, that are doing great things to help people every day. And I applaud you. But in those days, it wasn't such the case. So verse 4, they caught her red-handed. Look in verse 5, or actually verse 4. Teacher, they said to Jesus, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. The law of Moses says to stone her. What do you say? And in verse 6, it explains what they were doing. They were trying to trap him into saying something they could use against him. We'll stop right there for now. This law, according to the law, she was guilty. She was a Jew. This was one of the 3 worst sins. You have idolatry, you have murder, you have adultery. They were the big 3. And if Jesus agreed with them that she should be stoned, then they knew that he would lose his reputation with the people of being loving and accepting. But if he forgave and he condoned the adultery, he would break the very law of Moses, which he would stand in the synagogues and teach. But when we think about this law, we are really no different than this woman. Because the law does reveal our guilt. The 10 Commandments are still in effect. Are they not? So let's just run through a few of those, right? So the Bible says that we are not to commit adultery. 10 Commandments. Jesus said, if you have even looked lustfully at a woman, you have committed adultery. So I'm not going to show raising hands here, but we're pretty much all lustful. Okay? All right? Murder. Well, Jesus took it to the next level and said, if you've ever hated someone, you've committed murder. Well, we're all guilty of that. Okay? We're just not batting 1,000 here at all, are we? So many things, right? It says that we're not supposed to covet. You ever wanted something that somebody else had? Like, that's a nice truck, and you're not just admiring it. You're like, I want that. And you're jealous and all these things. We've coveted. Okay, there we go. Well, at Calvary First, we're just here to encourage you today. You know what? Just, it's all about you, right? Loving and accepting. But the fact is that we can't get past the point, sometimes we can't get past it literally, that we are guilty of sin. We've all sinned. Jesus pointed that out. Romans 3:23 says we all sinned and come short of the glory of God. We've all missed the mark, right? Nobody's perfect. So the law does reveal our guilt. We've all lied. We've all stolen. We've all taken God's name in vain in one way or another. Unless we see ourselves as sinners, we won't see our need for the Savior. So the first thing we see today is that the law reveals our guilt. And that's what we see in this passage. She was guilty. Guilty as sin. She was. And the second thing I want us to see here is this, about the love. The love reveals God's grace. The law reveals our guilt, but the love reveals God's grace. Let's pick up the story in the last part of verse 6. They were trying to trap him, but Jesus stooped down and wrote in the dust with his finger. Verse 7, they kept demanding an answer. Jesus always frustrated them. Did you ever notice that? He never answered their question the right way. Like they ask him a question and he starts writing on the ground. They're like, what? This is kind of important. What are you doing? Anyway, I digress. I don't know. I think that's kind of funny myself. So he stood up again and said, all right, but let the one who has never sinned throw the first stone. One of the classic lines in all the Bible, in my opinion. Then he stooped down again and wrote in the dust. When the accusers heard this, they slipped away one by one, beginning with the oldest until only Jesus was left in the middle of the crowd with the woman. Then Jesus stood up again and said to the woman, "Where are your accusers? Didn't even one of them condemn you?" "No, Lord," she said. And Jesus said, "Neither do I. Go and sin no more." Now, there's all kinds of theories about what he wrote. He knelt down and he wrote in the sand. And apparently this was something that great teachers would do sometimes. It was, historians say that they would do that. They would kneel down and they would write in the sand. Well, Jesus did that because he was a great teacher. Some people say that he wrote down actually all of the sins of all the men that brought accusations against this woman. That's possible. There's a word in the Greek called graphin, and that means to write. And then katagraphin is a word in the Greek that means to write against, to write a record against someone. Now, if we take that interpretation of that Greek word, that's possible that he was writing down a record of their wrongs. And that's why when they looked at it, they're like, "Oh, he's writing all my sins. He's putting my name beside it. I am out of here." Right? I don't know. That makes sense. We don't know for sure. But what we do know is this, is that he was writing something powerful. And we know the next phrase. And this is from William Barclay says this: "The scribes and the Pharisees continued to insist on an answer." In verse 7 we read that they asked for an answer, and they got it. Jesus said in effect, "All right, stone her, but let the man that is without sin be the first to cast a stone." It may well be that the word for without sin means not only without sin, but even without a sinful desire. Jesus was saying, yes, you may stone her, but only if you've never wanted to do the same thing yourselves. He's saying, okay, go ahead and stone her, but if you've never wanted to commit adultery, go ahead and cast the first stone. You're like, no. There was a silence, and then slowly the accusers drifted away. Without sin, without even a sinful desire. You see, God's grace reminds us that we are not what we did. Even though we know we have sinful desires, God's grace comes in. Jesus showed his grace and his love and his mercy. Satan is the accuser of the believers. He tells us another story then about God's grace. And we can't let his voice drown out the shouts of the Holy Spirit who says, you are redeemed. If you're here today and you know Jesus Christ as your Savior, you and we are redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. Satan, when he reminds us of our past, we need to remind him of his future. Because we read the back of the book and we win. And Satan gets thrown into the lake of fire for eternity. Not for a little bit, for eternity. Then, what does he say next? What does he say if you look in verse 11? She says, nobody's here to condemn me. He says, neither do I. Go and sin no more. He doesn't say, now that you're forgiven, go and try to do your best. Just do your best, honey. It's okay. He didn't say that. He said, go and sin no more. He didn't say, now, since I'm Jesus, I understand your past, and I understand that your daddy didn't love you and he mistreated you, and you've been looking for love in all the wrong places. I understand that, and hey, it's okay. Just try to go and sin less. Just try to cut it down a little bit. Cut back, and do your best not to sleep with married men if you can help it. He didn't do that. He didn't do that, did he? He said, go and sin no more. He did, didn't he? He didn't say that's just the way you are, and he doesn't say that to us. He doesn't say, hey, you're just always going to struggle with that lust, man. Just realize it, deal with it. It's your cross to bear. He didn't say that. You know what? Oh, you've had a problem overeating all your life. It's okay. Just try to eat less. Just maybe go to Chicken Express less. Drink a little less sweet tea. Try to stay away from Golden Corral. Just maybe go a couple times a month instead of every day, right? No, he doesn't say that. He doesn't say, oh, just covet just a little bit less, right? Just try to cut back. Oh, well, that gossiping, listen, we're all going to, hey, we can't help it. We're just people. Just try to cut back a little bit. He doesn't say that to us. See, this verse is not in the Bible by mistake. God puts it there not just as a nice, colorful story so he can tell this great narrative. No. It's there for us. In essence, he's saying, I don't condemn you either, Tim Brown. Go and sin no more. And put your name there. That's what he's saying to us. He says, go and sin no more. There's an urgency here. We are trapped in darkness if we follow Satan. If we follow our flesh, we're trapped in darkness. Jesus came to be our light, to bring us out of that. You see, our secret life, our adultery, our porn, our materialism, our anger, our unforgiveness, our gossip, our greed, those are our behaviors. And we can have shame because of our sin. We don't like ourselves, so we eat more, or we do that more. We lust more. We're alone. We harm ourselves. We go deeper and deeper. We have doubts. We even doubt our salvation because how can I be saved if I do this? There's a sense of urgency here when he says, go and sin no more. It's not like, hey, just if you have time, just try to sin less. He says, sin no more. Now, we know that we are not perfect. And there are some, and you may have heard some teachers of the Bible say that you can reach a state of sinless perfection. Well, that doesn't exist, okay, until we get to heaven. Jesus was the only perfect one. So let's just debunk that. It's not in the Bible. You can twist verses, but it's not there. So that's not it. But what it is that we live a life of habitual holiness instead of habitual sin. That's what he was telling her to do. Go and sin no more. Walk in the light. We need to believe, guys, we can get into this lie that is just the way I've always been. You don't understand. Anger runs deep in my family. I can't help it. You know what runs deep in mine too? I've said it, I say it all the time. Redneck runs deep. Okay? Man. And you know what? It's hard to break those habits of being angry. I struggle with that today. But I'm here to tell us all that we can be healed. We have to believe. We don't have to stay that way. Jesus doesn't save us to leave us where we are. He saves us so that we can have light and life, an abundant life. We can be free, we can be healed, we can be changed because light always overwhelms darkness. He's saying to her and he's saying to us, go now and leave your life of sin. So the law reveals our guilt. The love reveals God's grace. And then the light reveals our hope. Isn't that awesome? Hope is an amazing word. I love it. It's probably my favorite word in the whole Bible. Because grace gives hope. Love gives hope. It's all about hope. The light reveals our hope. If you look in verse 12, this is our key verse. Jesus spoke to the people once more and said, I am the light of the world. If you follow me, you won't have to walk in darkness because you will have the light that leads to life. When he told her to go and sin no more, he didn't say this in a frivolous way. I forgave you, so, cut that out. Don't do that again, okay, sweetheart? It wasn't that. After we hear that story of his grace, Jesus came to her. And he, in that moment, he was not the light of the world to her. He was the light of her world. It's the difference. Is he the light of your world? Is he really the light of your world? Or are we walking in darkness? Do we spend most of our days in the darkness rather than the light? Is he a personal Savior to you? Or is he just some philosophy? You see, I think for so many of us that have grown up in church, Jesus is a Sunday school figure. He's a story. Anybody remember flannel graph? Back in the day, they had flannel graph with stuff on the back of it, and they had this flannel graph board, and you stick it up there, and let's tell the story of Moses, and then the 10 Commandments would be up there, and then they'd fall off, and she'd put them back on. You know what I'm saying? Some of you kids are like, what is he talking about? It's real. It existed. It was way, way, way back there, right? I feel old. But you know what? Jesus is more than a flannel graph figure. He's more than a story in Sunday school. He is your light and my light of our world. If he doesn't become that, then we will walk in darkness and we will never have hope. Because unless he becomes personal to us, we can be saved and have fire insurance, but that's not why God saved us. Jesus saved us so we could be the light. He said, you are the light of the world. You're a city that's set on a hill. Don't cover up that light. Don't put it under a bushel. No, let it shine. How can it shine if we don't even get the fact that he is our light? If it doesn't become personal to us, then we have no hope. We might as well fold up and go home, sell this building, and never come back here again. I'm sorry, but that's not the Jesus that we serve. If he's not enough to light up your life and my life, then why in the world do we talk about it? John 12 in the Message 1246 says, I am the light that has come into the world so that all, everybody say all, who believe in me won't have to stay any longer in the dark. You and I don't have to live in the dark. Just because our parents suffered from mental illness, we don't have to. Just because our dad was angry, we don't have to. Just because our brothers were addicted to porn, we don't have to be. Just because our family is all about materialism and we have a legacy of that, we don't have to be greedy. We don't have to covet. Just because our mama had a big mouth, we don't have to have a big mouth. I'm just getting real. You're thinking it. You're like, whatever your secrets in your family are, you don't have to carry them on anymore. Just because you inherited debt doesn't mean you have to get into debt more or stay in debt. Nothing gives hope like light. If this were total darkness right here and I lit a candle, nothing could stop that light. I might could blow it out, but I light a candle and it's light. It may not be a lot of light, but it's a light. It expels the darkness. You know, there was a study a group of graduate students did, a very bizarre experiment. Some of you may think it's cruel, but they took lab rats and they put them in a tank of water and they placed the tank in a totally dark room. And they monitored them with video equipment. And those rats swam for almost 6 hours before giving up and drowning. I know, it's sad. Poor rats. Then the students took another set of lab rats and they put them in a tank of water and placed that tank in a room where there was a small lamp. And their hypothesis was that the light would give the rats hope and they would survive longer. And as it turns out, they survived much longer. 17 hours they swam. Something about the light enabled them to survive longer. The light always defeats darkness. There is not enough darkness in the world to put out even the smallest flame of the smallest candle, because darkness never, get it, never defeats light. And the good news is that when we believe, it becomes personal. He's not an out there God, some philosophy. He's our personal light. And when we know that, we receive the freedom from the condemning voice of Satan that says, you can't overcome that. You will never be. You won't. You ever hear those voices? I hear them. We all hear them. It's silenced in the presence of God's grace and his goodness. The one who says, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness. We're called to be lights in the world around us. 1 Peter 2:9 in the NIV says this, but you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. But I think too many times our lives become, in this world, in this culture, kind of like a movie theater. We go into the movie theater and they turn the lights down and our eyes kind of adjust to the darkness. And then at the end, you know, that's why they don't just fling the lights up like, and you're like, ah. They don't do that. They kind of slowly raise them up, right? Sometimes we're like movie theaters in our world. We just kind of let our eyes adjust to the darkness instead of walking in the light. We live in a dark world, but we must rely on God to be lights. Isaiah 50:10, the last part of that verse says, if you are walking in darkness without a ray of light, trust in the Lord and rely on your God. We need God every day. Every morning, whether you have a quiet time or a time with God in the morning or not, we need to stop and say, God, this is your day. I'm going to walk in the light. I trust in you because I can't do this alone. Not any darkness can put out the smallest light.